So thank you all very much for your talks today. A big theme that I noticed throughout was the fear of autocracies spreading on the continent. Janisa, could you tell us what's happening in South America?
Well, as I mentioned on the talk, Russia, China, and Iran have a big presence in Latin America, but looking at the region, focusing a bit closer, you can see easily how it is the Cuban regime that is leading all of the infiltration into what are now democracies and creating and strengthening autocracies within countries that are already in that path. So I think the collaboration is not only on a political level, but you can also trace the sources, and this is important as to what Carolina was speaking about, to the economic force. Bolivia is the country that produces the cocaine that then gets transported through Venezuela and then towards Europe, or through Nicaragua and Cuba towards the US. So it is undeniable that if we were to achieve freedom in one of these countries, and Venezuela has elections this coming July 28th, it is a domino effect that can affect then other countries in the region. And that's the importance, I think, not just of the Freedom Fellowship, but the Human Rights Foundation and the Oslo Freedom Forum, understanding that we cannot keep battling battles on our own. If the international community wants to support democracy, they have to do it on the entire environment, then instead of just focusing on one country at a time, which is what we've seen usually.
Carolina, what are you seeing?
Well, definitely, specifically on the environmental issues, we also see so many similarities between these dictatorships. So I didn't have the time, of course, to speak about it, but not only is drug trafficking very, very related, and it's causing these troubles, but we can see the same issues happening in Venezuela, for example. So the issues in Venezuela surrounding illegal mining that is also involving drug trafficking money, it's also happening in the highlands in Bolivia. And right now, it's not only happening in the highlands in Bolivia, but those coca leaf plantations, for example, I was talking about, it's because actually those same drug dealers are settling inland in the lowlands and continue that devastation. And it's also even more interesting that, for example, she was discussing the China interference in Bolivian aspects. And this is, we can see it in illegal mining because they are the ones with the Chinese investments and companies that are coming and they are paying for this $1 million campaigns and machines that are destroying the rivers there through illegal mining. And then they are using that same money to go and buy illegal land in the lowlands. We see that in Venezuela, but we can definitely see it in other dictatorships, even in South Africa or in other places of Africa. I've been talking to activists, and they see the same similarities. So in a very specific case of environmental, we actually see those tentacles spreading, and they are teaching the same protocols on how to address and how to attack environmentalists, how to attack activists also, and how to even create the narrative of actually these are the governments that are supporting environmental. So they say that they are supporting environment. They say that they actually want to save and preserve indigenous communities. Actually, they're absolutely destroying those communities and abusing them and then using those people to gain more votes and control in other areas. So yes.
Thank you. Yunier, can you explain how Cuba is the launching point?
Well, our point is in Cuba, we had a lot of organizations, of the civil society organizations, but also we have an agreement for democracy in Cuba. In Cuba, we have so many groups of the civil society fighting against that oppressive regime, but we don't have a lot of support of the international community, and this is my point here. Because the regime in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, until Putin and China, they have a lot of support, they have a lot of money, they have financial resources to make sustainable not only his narrative in all the world, but also they have a lot of resources to make sustainable for them, of course, a repression inside our countries. So we don't only need putting the biggest spotlight around the world, the cases of Cuba, of also all of dictatorships, but also we need to put in the spotlight the collaboration between all of us, as an activist, as organizations of the civil society especially, because we have a lot of people fighting against that power on the street, inside our countries, but also in the exile. So we need and invite everyone here to understand the point is we have people fighting right now, not yesterday, but now. We are fighting, people fighting in the field. So we need to understand that we have to look what the civil society are doing in that kind of places as Cuba, as Venezuela, as Nicaragua, Bolivia. What the people, what the activists, what the civil society are doing right now in that places and support that people. This is the people who we need to support and put in the spotlight, because they are fighting now against a powerful machine, as I say in my presentation, a colossal machine of propaganda.
It's an asymmetric threat.
Yes, this is a colossal machine. They have newspapers, they have journalists, they have many things to try to make it silence, to make a curtain in front of this reality, a terrible reality inside our country. So that's my point.
Thank you.
Oh, well.
And Rafael, can you talk about who the Nigerian government works with?
Right. So the thing about Nigeria is it has a long history of dictatorship. Nigeria had nearly 30 years with actual dictators who were military fatigued. So it was not very difficult to know what was going on in Nigeria. But since the beginning of the Fourth Republic in 1999, what has happened is that the military guys, they have changed their fatigue. Now they are wearing civilian uniform. And it is not easy for people from outside to actually know what is going on inside. What we have right now is an inverted sort of dictatorship where supposedly elected democratic leaders actually carry out electoral coups and then they continue in that manner. So if you look at the entire West Africa and the entire Sahel region, what you will find is that, especially if you are using the Economist Democracy Index, you find that most of the countries are either authoritarian regimes or they are hybrid regimes, like Nigeria. But most of them also claim to be democratic countries. Most of them hold elections that are not really elections. They are just self-selections.
Can you name those countries?
Oh, well, there is Nigeria, there is Cameroon, there is Niger, and the list goes on and on. In fact, in Niger it was so bad under the so-called democratic government that now what you have is the military has taken over because they felt that whatever that democratic government was doing was not right. And the only reason this happens is because these guys have found a way to abuse democracy without signaling to the rest of the world that what they're actually practicing is dictatorship. So we need a lot of attention, for example, on how to decipher how these regimes work, how these so-called democratic countries work, so that we can figure out their dictatorial tendencies and begin to offer approaches to tackle them.
Thank you. Janisa, can you talk about some of the tactics and tools that are shared across these dictatorships?
It's interesting because clearly they were more prepared to deal with violent uprisings. So we've seen a sort of learning curve of how to repress nonviolent movements. Initially, it was a lot of political public repression, and that is the route that, for example, the Nicaraguan government doesn't mind taking at this point because they're not pretending to be a democracy. But other countries, and here I will speak about Bolivia specifically, I think there are dictatorships or authoritarian governments that have become more sophisticated in their repression, and they have learned how to hide it and make it look like it's either an accident. And of course, this also comes from the Cuban school, and we have Rosa Maria Payá here, whose dad was murdered, but the regime tried to cover it as if it was an accident. And that is what they do with many activists in these cases. And in the case of Bolivia, the publicity and media machine is so well oiled that they were smart enough to protect the image of the president ahead of time, presenting Evo Morales as an environmental protector and an indigenous president, before initiating the destruction of our environmental protected areas, or, for example, the political persecution that we are living currently. So it's not only the silencing of voices and controlling media, but it's also the making it look like an accident when you're repressing different movements, and also infiltrating and trying to create different types of divisions within nonviolent movements. And I'll quickly give an example. I was surprised in 2019 when we were having large civil disobedience campaigns in Bolivia about the fact that it seems that infiltrators started planting LGBTQ flags in middle of nonviolent protests, so that this would create a point of controversy between protesters, and this would create divisions within the movement. The same day in Sudan, that was also having different types of protests, the regime did the same thing, planting these flags among protesters in order to create disruption. So you can see the exact same division tactic being used in Bolivia in the middle of South America, and in Sudan in Africa, in order to disrupt the unity and discipline that this movement had. So they're very sophisticated, and this is when studying nonviolence and becoming prepared to lead these larger campaigns can help you prepare and avoid falling into their traps.
Yeah, so you have misinformation and disinformation tactics being used.
Exactly, and division tactics within civil society.
All right. Those are some questions that I had, but is there anyone in the audience that wants to ask any questions? I'm going to repeat it after you.
Okay. I can stand up too. I'm just wondering because, you know, I'm half Cuban and half Norwegian, and living in Norway, it's very clear to me that Norwegians have a very different image of Cuba. Like they think, I think Europeans as a whole think of Cuba as a beach place and just everything is wonderful and vacation and things like that. And I think many of you are talking about maybe there needs to be more of a spotlight. And I know earlier in your talk you asked for journalists, and there maybe aren't so many journalists here. But are there things that you think all of us could maybe be doing to put more of a spotlight on the truth that's happening in your countries, sharing things on social media, or what is it that you think that every person could be doing, not just as journalists, or you know that we can help get involved?
Okay, I got it.
So what could an everyday person do, not just journalists, to put a spotlight?
Well, the name that you say is propaganda, you know that. And the Cuban regime is a big specialist in the middle of the Caribbean to produce and make propaganda. And I say it, they spend a lot of money for that kind of reason. And not only spend money, they have agents of influence in many places of the world, even here in Norway. So they have association of pro-revolution in Cuba, in any place in Europe. In Spain, for example, they have now more than 300 of associations to keep money for the European taxes, for example, to send directly to the Havana regime. And in another way, they use it, that kind of spaces to share and to sell this kind of propaganda about Cuban's paradise. For that reason, I say so clear, remember that wherever you hear someone else speaking about the Cuban Revolution, because it's another lie, a big lie, actually has 65 years about this lie, running as a rumor for all the world. So some things that the common people can do is, first, don't travel to Cuba, don't go, don't put your money in a dictatorship who used your money to repress my people in my country, to put 1,100 young people like you in prison, just for chanting freedom on the street, chanting freedom on filming and transmitting on the stream in his own social media. They use it, the agents of the security of the state, so that you can imagine how powerful and aberration things is my country right now. The security agent in my country just use it after 11 July protests in 2021. They used it, the transmission of the live transmission of the young people in the street, in his own Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever they are. They use it. That recording to put in jail for 7, 10, 12, 14 years in prison, just for filming and recording and upload to his own social media in my country. So don't go to Cuba, don't put your money in the hands of the dictatorship, and find our movement in the internet, CubaDecide.org. But not only Cuba Decide, we have a lot of platform in Cuba, for Cuba, to fighting for freedom in Cuba, and support give your money to these people because these people, these activists, are fighting for freedom, not for anymore, just for freedom because it's the fair. Justice, freedom, and again, justice, freedom, and again. So,
Thank you. Rafael, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I think that it is important for, especially people in the West, and maybe every other place in the world, to sort of notice the pattern that these countries, especially in West Africa, operate through. And a good example is, for example, if the dictators that African leaders are comfortable with are, say, maybe overthrown by another set of dictators, the existing cabal of African leaders who have always supported the previous dictators, they will try to fight for that dictator as if something good has just been sent out of power. But usually the case is that they are just trying to protect themselves. And they create a lot of confusion when they do that. They signal to the West, who donate a lot of money to them, that there is some sort of coalition going on to protect democracy. But it is a lie, it is not true. And another thing is, it is important that we have equal response from the international community to those who violate the sanctity of democracy, whether directly through coups or through electoral heist. Because, in fact, it is worst because when they carry out electoral heist, they make it look like, oh, there were just a few skirmishes here and there, but the elections were completely free and fair. But it's a complete lie. The last election in Nigeria, people were disenfranchised. Ethnic groups were targeted. And at the end of the day, the votes were seriously rigged, massively rigged. So we need people in the West to stay conscious of this dynamic. They should not think that because our politicians say we have had democratic elections, that indeed they are democratic elections. So African leaders have perfected the art of creating institutions that look democratic.
So if these institutions aren't truly democratically elected, what can she do to help you?
Well, I think what you can do to help us, for example, one, is to continue to put a pressure on your government to apply.
On your government?
Yes, to apply. I'm talking about the international community now, to be precise. To apply the same measure that they do to dictatorships in Africa to those who carry out electoral coups, those who carry out electoral heists, those who pretend to be democratic but are not, because the evidence is always there. When they commit these atrocities, when, for example, the Nigerian government massacred NSAS protesters in 2020, we expected the international community to condemn the Nigerian government all round. So things like that will give us confidence to continue to fight against those tendencies in our own country. And then secondly, of course, you can also support organizations who are doing continuous work to put these governments under pressure. To let them know that you're not going to get away with it if you continue to abuse us or abuse democratic institutions.
Sorry. I would just like to point out that we should never underestimate the actions that you can take. For example, when I was talking about Bolivia and the example of us protesting during the fires, there was this very specific campaign, that it was a hashtag campaign in Twitter. And we were trying to make international community aware of what was happening. And definitely we should not relate only in virtual campaigns. We need the pressure on the streets, definitely. But when you're talking about international community, these dictatorships are very populist, and they do need the attention and the help from international community. So all they do is create this narrative that, oh, they don't want the interference, they don't want any US money and Euro money, but they actually do need a lot of money. They are welcoming the money, and they don't want these people to be maybe suspicious of what is going on in Bolivia in this case. So when we started campaigning about this, just showing that something else was happening that was disrupted to this agenda of Evo Morales being environmentalist, the backlash was immediate. So they started attacking us, and we knew that we were onto something. So for example, a few weeks ago, European Union gave Bolivia and the Ministry of Environment 50 million euros to deal with environmental issues. that is as harmful to us as to go to Cuba and go to tourism in Cuba. You're injecting money directly into this regime. They're not going to protect any forest with that. They're just going to start repressing people, taking lands or whatever they are doing. So if you know that, if you have that knowledge as a just normal person that is interested in finding out about other countries, start analyzing the campaigns that activists are making, not governments. So activists normally are the dissidents. So just start listening. If you don't know a lot about it, I would guess start looking at the friends of those governments. In Bolivia, it was very clear. They were always friends with Chavez. They were always friends with Cuba. They're always friends with Putin and Iran. So even that would make you, suspicious about something. And then if you want to support those campaigns in international community, it will definitely help us. We are on the ground doing the real work, but also we need you to be attentive, because that actually helps us. And then when your governments start doing these things, like giving money, you can actually say no, what are you doing? How are you going to have any sort of control over what they are doing with this money? So I think that's, yeah.
All right.
Way up.
So,
Can I
wait a
add
minute.
some
No,
color?
we'll go to Janisa.
Very quickly. And even on top of that, just get in touch with us. Please come meet me afterwards, because sometimes each person has a different way of helping. I don't know if you're a graphic designer or if you like writing articles or if you can translate things, but your time is incredibly valuable, and any citizen has something they can offer, but the best way to know that is to actually talk to us, because asking everyone to tweet something would be very generic and would get more attention, but I prefer an hour of your time putting subtitles on videos or translating things or simply joining our movement and having your phone number if I ever need a contact in Norway. So please, please contact us, and please, I'm gonna look for you and take your phone number. Yes.
All right. In the black shirt.
This is more or less an expert question, because I have been doing human rights advocacy for 25 years, and I pick up on the European Union because exactly I've been doing it at the European Union. So there are the human rights clauses for every commercial agreement, or the environmental issues. Have your organizations been able to conduct advocacy activities in Brussels? Have you been able to meet with European Commission delegations? Were you able to address those issues? First question. And I have a second part very rapidly. There is a division in the European Parliament between the leftist parties and the more conservative, or let's say right parties, especially regarding South American regions. So the idea is that the leftist parties are supporting those types of regions against the capitalist movement of the West and the financial system, etc. So from your point of view, what would you, let's say, to the leftist MPs ahead of the European Union elections, European Parliament elections, today?
Okay, thank you. Janisa, do you have anything to say on this?
We have contacted them. The problem is that the voice of activists versus the voice of governments is not always as strong. And I will dare to say publicly that many ambassadors and other institutions are afraid of getting kicked out of Bolivia specifically, because the US ambassador has been kicked out in the past. And sadly, while I think that the European Union has made wonderful work and has played an important role in Bolivia, not just them, but in general, sometimes people that are working as diplomatic representatives will choose to protect their jobs as diplomatic representatives inside the country than being the ambassador that got kicked out of the country. And that is one issue. And on the other side, the fact that there is so much restraint economically and judicially against journalists and human rights organizations means that people that are in these positions don't have the human rights reports that they need in order to take action. And people take the lack of human rights reporting as meaning that nothing bad is happening there, instead of trying to understand that in reality, everyone has something covering their mouths, and that's why they cannot report anything. However, what I could say to these people, come to my country, look at my forest, smell how it smells when everything is burning, and then tell me that this government is protecting the environment. Come see for yourself. You don't even have to listen to me.
All right. Well,
lies and repressions and fake elections. What's the status of the internet locally and access to the internet
So the question is, what's the status of the internet, given all the electoral issues and protests?
Right. So one thing that you'll find that's common across West Africa and the Sahel region in general is that our governments frequently weaponize the internet or their control over the internet against citizens, especially when we become vociferous about, their misdeeds and dictatorial activities. For example, the Nigerian political elite in the last 10 years have sponsored a bill to censor free speech on the internet 3 different times in 3 different ways. The last attempt, they inserted a death penalty clause in the bill because they say they want to tackle hate speech and fake news, but they did not define what hate speech is. They did not define what fake news is. So it's completely dependent on the mood of whoever is in power. They say, you have committed fake news, we are going to hang you. So of course, it immediately necessitated us to mobilize citizens against such actions. And one of the organizations that I have been doing some work with, we were able to develop some documents around democratic solutions to fake news and hate speech. But that's just one part. The larger question is to continue to sort of educate the public, because often they create a very confused narrative and justification for their wrong actions, and then they confuse people and then sort of pit us against them. They say, oh, we don't want them to do what they're doing because we are foreign actors, that we are being used by foreign actors to do whatever. So it's important for me, I think, that we should just continuously be on the lookout for the ways that this government might react to the things that we do. I don't think we have complete control over how they respond to our condemnation of their continuing dictatorial tactics. But one thing we can do is that whenever they take such extreme measures, we are there to condemn them. We are there to say we are not going to accept it.
So it sounds like they do takedown of different sites and social media. Do they ever actually block internet access?
They do that. In fact, during the NSAS protests, for example, they did shut down the internet, and people had to start using VPN. Mm-hmm. And recently, in fact, last year, we had a very recent experience last year. They shut down the internet, and people had to start using VPN. And then another thing that the Nigerian government is doing now, because you see, their actions in the last 4 years can be directly linked to everything we did during NSAS. During NSAS, they blocked our bank accounts. So we couldn't use the donations we got directly into our bank account, and we had to turn to Bitcoin. Because they found out that we were able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, through the blockchain machine and technology, now they've taken actions, like serious policies against using Bitcoin in Nigeria. In fact, as we speak now, they have banned a lot of Bitcoin platforms in Nigeria. So Nigerians have to use VPN for them to be able to use Bitcoin, for example, for their transactions. And the trust in government to keep our money safe is dwindling. So these tactics are increasing. So that's why I say we just must stay on the lookout, because I don't think they will stop. But we must make sure that whenever they happen, we are there to counter them.
Thank you. Janisa?
No, I just for a second. Another thing that we need to understand is the internet in my country, for example, is another tool to repress people in my country. Because in Cuba, we just have one internet company, and it's another monopoly of the military government in my country. So they use it. And if the regime in the Havana can switch the internet wherever they want it, my question is, this is not another repression mechanism and another violation of human rights in my country right now, and the world entire knows that. And the European Union knows that and support that because they have an agreement of dialogue, political dialogue in cooperation with the Havana regime, and they send a lot of money for switch the internet. Cubans punch people, shoot people in the street, put people in jail, and when that kind of absurd and terrible things happen in my country, again, they switch the internet, they blockade. The real blockade in the war, in this war now, is the blockade from the government of my country to the people in my country. So that kind of narrative that the left political party love to speak about, a free war in Cuba, it's a free society, they have problems, but they are free. Another lie. I don't want to use a bad word here, but is the correct word all of you knows well. And you, all of you, European people here, are paying for that because your taxes go directly to the Havana regime to switch the internet in my country or to use the internet video or the internet post of the Cuban citizen in my country in Facebook, on social media, whatever network we are, to put in jail. So you have to know that too.
Mm. All right, thank you, Rafael. We're near the end, so I just wanted to hear from Janisa about next year's Fellows Program.
We are very lucky that we're expanding the program next year. Instead of 10 fellows, we will have 15, so our hands will be full.
We did it.
So, God and European Union visas permitting, we will have 15 speakers here next year. And I do want to take 1 second to acknowledge the work of my staff who really works very hard to make all of this happen. And of course, to the mentors who have spent countless hours working with us in order to make these talks what they are, thank you so much. And you, Brady and Farron, who will have 15 new speeches to work on for next year. Thank you.
We can't wait. We can't wait. Awesome. Thank you all for coming today. They'll be around if you want to talk to them.
Thank you.